Okay guys, let's talk about setting up your own still lives at home. This is especially difficult because you're working at home and not in the classroom. So you're going to have to use things that you might find in your house, garage, workspaces, anything like that. When you're setting up a still life, start really simple, like these objects that I've chosen. So don't try to pick anything incredibly difficult. Now these aren't the easiest things because there are some differences in shininess, right? A little shiny here, really transparent and shiny with the glass. But as far as the shapes, there's nothing way too complicated. So you can increase the level of complication as you go, and you're totally in charge of just how complicated you make your still life. So at the beginning of the class, we'll pick small assortments of objects, maybe 3 to 5 objects. And actually, there's kind of a rule of thumb that if you pick odd numbers, so 3 here in this case, or 5, it tends to work out better than just 2 objects or a single object. Or I should say even numbers of objects. That's not always the case. It depends on how you lay it out. But what I want to talk today about mostly is just laying out your objects. So this is a good example of 3 objects that could work really well because there's a good size variety. So we have short, kind of a squarish object, kind of medium height and fatter, and then tall and skinny on the side. So that size variety, I'm already setting myself up for success. That's a good thing. The layout right now is the most boring you can make it. Lining them up right in a row like this, ducks in a row, it's just not that interesting. So if I was going to line these 3 objects up together, I'm going to start thinking about overlap. So I'm going to shift things around a little bit. I'm going to pull this apple out in front so it's noticeable that this sits out in the foreground and this is behind. Now I'm going to push my wine glass a little further back so it becomes the farthest thing back in the distance. And now I kind of have like a pyramid or a triangle effect between the 3. They all touch each other in some capacity, or there's almost some overlap that happens here. There's some definite overlap right there. And that already is a more interesting layout. I know it doesn't seem that wildly different, but this would be a great example of how to lay this thing out in a vertical style composition. So you notice if there was a rectangle around this, it would be a taller rectangle than it is wide. If I did want to lay it out a little bit wider, let's see. Maybe I could do a similar kind of triangular layout. But if I wanted a wider design, maybe we could make a layout that would be a wider rectangle than it is tall. But I think this assortment works a little better as a grouping vertically. Okay, if you wanted to make it just a little more complicated, let's throw a couple more things into the mix. So how about a cup as well? That's upside down right now. And a little cube. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main objects in here. One thing that you'll notice is anything shiny, you get the element of a reflection. You can actually see me and the camera reflected too. But that reflection could be a really cool focus point and an interesting point in your design. But once you have more components, there's more to wrangle. It can be a little more difficult, but it could also lead to a lot more excitement. So what do I mean by that? Let's take a peek and see if we can figure some things out. So one, automatically, I'm going to start thinking about, could I stack things? So to me, the minute you add like a stacking component, it's a little bit more interesting. So that's kind of, I don't know, just right off the bat, a little bit more fun. Now I can start to play with front to back. So I like to put taller objects in the back of a still life because you can still see them through and around other objects. Okay, playing with the spacing. Notice both of these cups overlap that edge of the wine glass a little bit. And now we've got our smallest component. So there's this good variety of really small, kind of medium, larger, largest. And now, if I were arranging this still life, I might want to throw this guy a little to the left. And the reason, I don't want to line him up square in the middle of my still life. It kind of lines up too perfectly with that stem of the wine glass. I'm going to throw it off kilter. Check out how that kind of is a nice play between the apple. It's like my eyes ping pong between those two, left to right. And now we could have kind of a long, oops, sorry, I'm going to knock into my camera, rectangular composition through here. And you get a lot of height variety. So if you think of these as stepping stones, my eyes are going to bounce from wine glass down to the apple. And it kind of leads your eye through the design. There's all kinds of things you can do to make your setups a little bit stranger. So get creative when you set things up. So anything that has removable parts like that lid, play around with it. Play with tipping things upside down. Again, the idea of stacking. flipping a wine glass upside down, who knows? All kinds of things you could do to throw things off balance and make things just look a little more interesting and unique, right? So all of a sudden, I just made a very different still life that feels a little bit unique, right? And kind of funky. We turned everyday objects into something that feels a little bit different. So experiment when you're making your still lives, and don't limit yourself, because even though they're what would you call them, pretty basic objects, there's a lot you can do with them for sure.